reciprocate.
We will. I plan on doing it. Don't worry about it. Good. Thanks a lot, Gene. Good morning. My name is John Lyons from San Francisco, California. This is August 2nd, 2004, and I'm going to interview my uncle Jack Lyons, John Albert, interviewed by John Edwards. So good morning and thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Welcome to South Dakota.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Why don't you just start with some basics, full name, date of birth, pecking order, and maybe was there a reason you were named for anyone in the family?
My name is John Albert Lyons, but I always went by the name of Jack. I was born August 5th, 1934. The reason I was named John was after my uncle Jack, whose real name was John. The Irish are very typical about naming people by one name but calling them by their nickname. And I was born in this very house.
You were born on the farm,
yes,
not in the hospital.
No, at the farm. And allegedly, the willow tree in the front yard died the day I was born.
Is that right?
And that's part of the family lore. Yeah.
That's a good omen or a bad omen. We're sure it was a good. How old were your mom and dad when you were born?
Wait, can you just close that door? Let's see.
I'm sorry.
My mother would have been 36, and Dad, I think 35.
Okay.
I was the fourth child.
Number 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a recollection what your first job on the farm was? What was something that your chore was on an ongoing basis?
Well, mainly I think I worked with the chickens.
Yeah.
That was the main thing that I did.
And that was one of the cash producing income products that you had. It was fat and milk that went to market.
Right, and it was a very laborious task to clean the eggs every week. And we would take the cases of eggs into Banks Grocery, and that's where we bought the groceries with us.
So was it a barter system or was it really cash for cash?
Well, I think it was probably cash for cash.
Yeah. Do you recall any pets that you had or that were farm pets that were fairly close to you all?
Well, we always had dogs. My mother was a great pet lover.
Yeah.
And the earliest dog I remember was maybe a kind of a collie by the name of Rolly.
Yeah.
And then later on, we had Kilroy. And Kilroy was the one who couldn't stand storms and would chew up the doors inside when there was a storm.
There was a bad storm?
Yeah, and the various cats and pigeons. And
yeah.
Your dad is the one who had the pigeons, I believe.
Right, that's what we've heard.
Yeah.
When you were growing up, there was a transition from horses to tractors. Were you old enough to have worked with horses, or were you mostly...
Not really. I just remember the horses in the barn, and when the dad would let them out, they would run from the barn to the exercise yard down here. But I really never worked with the horses.
Yeah. This is kind of a two-part question, but education was obviously very highly regarded in your family.
Right.
Could you explain why you think that was, both with your mom and dad, or?
Well, of course, Mother was highly educated, which was rare for a woman during that period. But what was interesting about her family is that the women were educated perhaps more than the men, like her brothers.
Right.
I think my dad just realized that because of his circumstances that he didn't have much opportunity, that it was essential that there be further education.
What was it like when you guys going to the schoolhouse? Were you? Did you finish there? Did you graduate from 8th grade there?
No. I went to Sacred Heart in the 8th grade. Bob and Betty and I all were transferred to there. Mm-hmm. So I only spent 1 year at the Sacred Heart.
And how would you get from town to school at that time? Or I should say from the farm to school at that time.
Just by the one car that we had.
Your mom would take you in the morning, or?
Well, I think at that point, my older brothers probably took us. I can't remember for sure.
Right.
Because they would have been in high school.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What were some of the house rules that you remember? Your mom probably ran a pretty tight ship. Was there anything that you all thought was funny or but still abided by?
Well, she kind of lived by these old adages, people in glass houses don't throw stones. And have you heard that one before?
Yeah.
All that.
Yeah.
They both the parents were really quite strict, but they had to be raising that many kids.
Right.
And of course, the tale of the squeaking door, she would always listen for that at night to see if we were in.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, we always had to wake them up when we came home.
Oh, is that right? You had to tell them you would arrive.
Yeah.
And where did your bedrooms were upstairs? Is that right?
Yeah. The middle bedroom upstairs. Jean and I had the same bed, and Bob and Tom were in that same room.
Yeah. And your mom and dad slept on the ground level in the back. Is that right, or?
During the summer, but in the winter they slept upstairs.
Okay.
Because there really, in the earlier years, there wasn't any heat in the back rooms.
Huh.
Although later on they put in that kerosene heater back there.
Okay. That must have made things nicer.
Yeah. But they slept down there in the summer because it was cooler.
Right. What? Give us a little idea what your recollection of holidays were. Christmas, maybe Thanksgiving.
Well, they were always very festive occasions, and usually were some relatives around,
Right.
like Grandma Donahue and Ann and my grandfather. The usual of Santa Claus appearing.
And who would be Santa Claus?
Well, Mother's sister Ella was Santa Claus. That's the one I remember the most.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's nice.
And the midnight mass bit, and then the oyster stew afterwards.
Right. And the oyster stew, did you like it, or was it just that it was a treat?
You know, I don't know if I liked it or not. I know it was a treat. Later on, my own children never liked the oyster stew. So.
And was that an Irish tradition, or was that just because it was hard to get that maybe it was a special thing? Do you know?
You know, I'm not sure where that started. I just don't know.
Yeah. What about religion in your family? You obviously all went to, part of you went to Catholic school, you went to church on Sundays. What was some of the process there?
Well, the thing that it was very strict religion, and the thing that I probably disliked the most was the rosary in Lent, where we all had to every night kneel down and say the rosary, regardless of what happened.
You did that as a family here on the farm?
Yeah, we did that during
So-
Lent, and
Right.
you know, the eating candy and all that bit.
Right.
Before we went to the parochial school, we had catechism every Saturday.
Right. And that was at church in town, is that right? or-
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, I don't think any of us really understood too much what they were saying with the catechism bit.
Right. I don't think most kids understand that.
They talked in tongues or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But they were. It was very strict.
Okay. Were there are there any thoughts that you have or recollections of any sicknesses or illnesses or things that how things were taken care of when someone was injured, or you were obviously 4 miles from town, which as you had a car wasn't a long way away, but you were still pretty secluded.
Yeah, I remember some of those illnesses, and as a matter of fact, I still have the record my mother kept of our various illnesses. I have that.
Is that right?
Operations and so on. But some of those were quite serious and the long periods of recuperation, like the mumps and the measles, perhaps.
Huh. Is there one that sticks out in your mind, or is it, they're all kind of interesting?
Well, the most serious injury I remembered vaguely was your father's injury with the cow.
Right.
I remember coming home or something, and all of the blood and stuff around.
Yeah.
That's probably the most serious I remember.
Yeah. But there were probably lots of scrapes and bruises along the line.
In fact, I think it's a miracle that we did survive.
Yeah.
With all the things, the potential of harm in the farm.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there were lots of neighbors that had deaths on their families
Oh, yeah.
too. And
There were.
There's a little more
There were a lot of tragedies. There really were.
now comes kind of the fun part, because this hasn't been fun so far. But you have to answer one brother, and you have no hemming or hawing. But these are going to be questions on ranking your brothers. So, and you can answer honestly or however you feel is honest. Who was the strongest brother, physically?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Any guesses?
The one I remember, the workaholic, was Tom.
Yeah.
In terms of the field work and so on.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to answer that.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah.
Who do you think was the smartest? Book smartest.
The smartest. Well, probably ultimately Gene.
Right, ultimately.
Is that what's come out before?
No, that's good. That hasn't come up before. They've all chose themselves so far. You're the only one that's been honest so far. Who do you think was the funniest?
The funniest, well, Bob.
Yeah. And who was the most serious?
The most serious. Okay. Maybe Gene again.
Yeah. Was there a leader amongst you? Was there someone that stood out as the leader?
Well, I guess they were all leaders. That's the way I'll answer it.
Okay.
Because with their diverse interests and what happened to them later on, I think they were all leaders in their professions and their communities and so on.
Who was Mother's pet?
Mother's pet? Well, maybe Susan.
Susan? Yeah.
And Bob, perhaps.
Right. How about Father's pet?
Probably Pat and maybe Tom.
Tom? That came up,
Yeah.
those two answers came up before.
And I think a lot of that's because they were the ones that were interested in farming. I mean,
Right.
Tom, perhaps under different circumstances, would have stayed on the farm.
Yeah. What about, some more vague questions, but the best mechanic? Who do you think was the best mechanic on the farm among the boys?
Well, your dad and Pat and perhaps Tom.
Tom, yeah. How about, who was the best at getting out of trouble?
Getting out of trouble.
Getting out, not getting into it, because it sounds like you all might have done that. But getting out of it.
Perhaps Bob.
That's been the consensus up until this point. What a little bit, you kind of mentioned it maybe in the holiday segment, but on an entertainment front, you're a little bit younger than the older guys. But what were some of the things you did within the family, in the community for entertainment, whether it was fairs or music or?
Well, we were very involved in the 4-H. Although I don't think the older guys were involved in that much. I'm not sure we had it during
Pat mentioned it was just starting when he was a teenager.
Yeah, and that was very active when we younger ones were growing up. I mean, not only the fairs, but the preparation and the monthly meetings.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of entertainment, other than that, there were many things at the Willowdale School. The programs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know in those early years if we even traveled very much, though, because I imagine it was quite a feat to get that many people in a car.
Right.
Since we only had the one car.
Right.
Probably the only entertainment was going to Wagner to visit the relatives.
Yeah.
I remember one trip to the Black Hills to visit my father's parents, and my Grandpa Donahue made a kind of a seat in the back of the car so we could lie down.
Talk a little louder.
Okay. Where we could lie down, and I remember that with we 4 younger ones.
Mm-hmm. That was probably pretty exciting.
Yeah.
What when you talk about the 4-H, is there a particular year that you had where you remember one pet animal that you were involved with?
No, that's kind of a blur. We all had these beef that we showed, and of course there were other things with that too. There were parades and.
Yeah. What happened when the fair was over to the project? Did he get eaten?
Well, most of those, at least the top winners, were auctioned off, and somebody would buy them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I suppose the rest of them were sold later on.
Yeah. Music-wise, you've obviously excelled in the music field. On the farm, was there a little band or something that you all put together?
Yeah, it was a 4-H band. It was Tom and me and Betty and Bob and a couple neighbor kids.
Yeah. And you played for your own entertainment, or did you actually perform in public?
We performed in public. We did some dances. It was, in some respects, it was quite primitive because we had a very primitive sound system and things like that. But we had fun.
Yeah.
Of course, Bob used to go crazy with singing crazy songs like he would dress up as a woman.
Yes.
And that one song was "If I Knock the L Out of Kelly." Is one of the yeah.
That's great. Well, he's still dressing like a woman periodically.
Yeah. But in terms of music, though, our mother was very musical. But for some reason, when the children came, she didn't do much of that. But previous to that, she used to sing at weddings and keyboard-wise.
And she played the piano?
Yeah, and that's how we ended up at the piano here.
Yeah.
But I don't recall her doing much.
Did the older boys, Pat and Gene and Frank, did they play an instrument?
No, but part of that was we had the one car.
Right.
We had to get home after school and so on. So.
Right. So you graduated from grade school at Sacred Heart, and then you went to Yankton High School. Now, were you at I know there are 3 high schools now. The oldest high school? Did you graduate?
Oldest, yeah.
And you graduated from there.
1952.
And then tell us about what your thought process was after graduation. You immediately applied to college, or did you have any other thoughts?
No, I applied to college. I went to Yankton College for 2 years to major in music. And then the GI Bill, which I wanted for my education, was going out, being phased out by the government. So I knew if I wanted to get that, I would have to enlist in the military. I would have ultimately been drafted.
Mm-hmm.
So I enlisted, and then...
What year was this when you were going into the military, the 2 years?
54.
Okay.
And consequently was able to get really 3 degrees through the GI Bill, and having gone in during that time period. As it turned out, they didn't phase out the GI Bill, but they cut a lot of benefits for the future people.
Well, so tell us what you did. You went 2 years to Yankton, then you enlisted in the military, in the Army.
To Yankton College, 2 years.
Yes. And then you actually did your service at that time. You interrupted your college education to get your GI Bill.
Yeah.
And tell us about your military service.
Okay, I did the basic training in El Paso, Texas.
And you were in the Army?
Yeah. And then from there was transferred to Germany for at least about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm. And where did you live?
Mannheim, in Germany, where you lived.
Yes.
At one point, or where your dad worked.
Right.
Very, very wonderful service. I mean, the opportunities. I traveled every weekend and everything I could.
What was your job in the service?
I was the clerk typist and also chaplain's assistant.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, I didn't have to do... I think I did guard duty once or something.
Right. That's great. No KP duty.
No.
And so to talk a little more about your traveling, you were able to. What was Europe like? This was roughly 10 years after the war. Was it still a tough place?
Yes, it was, and innumerable beggars and people with limbs missing. And I remember Germany at that time was fairly well reconstructed, but France was still a shambles.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to as many countries as I could at that time. And of course, we did have the connection also in Germany of the exchange students that had lived here when I was growing up.
Oh, I see. You had exchange students that lived with you on the farm, or just that you'd met in...
On the farm.
Really?
Yeah. One from Gaggenau, near Baden-Baden.
Uh-huh.
And then another from near Stuttgart.
Did you keep in touch with them? And
yes. And have visited many times in the past and still keep in contact with them.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. They came. Was that through the school, or was that through church, or was that? Do you remember how they came to be?
Well, the first one, Ludwig, was through some agricultural.
I see.
Program, and then the next one was a Fulbright scholar in Lincoln, Nebraska, but had some connection here with one of the nuns, and ultimately ended up living with us.
So was he going to school at the time then, or was he just...
he was.
And he was absorbing maybe some of the...
Yeah, he was a teacher.
I see.
And he has died, but his son, we visit his son every time we go to Germany.
That's great.
He's the one who threw the wife out.
Oh, that's the first word out of his mouth?
Yeah.
Well, tell me again how that was.
Well, this gentleman had married an Aborigine from New Zealand and didn't get along with the wife, so he threw her mattress out the third-story window.
Nice.
And in Geislingen, Germany, where they live now. Yeah.
And this was someone you were going to stay with.
Yes.
And that was while you were in the service still, or this was later?
No, this was 3 years ago.
Okay, this is the son.
The son of the guy, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. Now, how would he have met a German have met an Aborigine to bring her back to...
Well, he wanders around the world teaching. He
I
teaches English, actually,
I see.
in German schools and so on, but somehow ended up in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Very, very wonderful young man, but he just has a few problems with women, especially.
Right. Well, that sounds like it. So, how old were you when you left the Army then? You spent 2 years, is that right?
Yeah, I would have been 22.
Okay, and then what happened?
From there, I went to the University of South Dakota for a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in music education.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, taught in schools in Iowa, Northwest Iowa, and Eastern Iowa for 7 years.
At what level? In the high school or college or?
That was high school with a little bit of elementary.
I see.
It was band and vocal.
Band and vocal.
But while I was doing that, I was working on a master's at University of South Dakota, Master of Music, and I got that in 62.
62. That was a good year. That was the year your first son was born.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right.
So you obviously were married at the time when you received
Margaret
your
and I were married in 1960.
And tell us a little bit about how you met Margaret and how
She
that...
taught, she lived in Spencer, Iowa, and I taught in a town pretty close there named Royal. And we happened to meet at some music affair
Mm-hmm.
and got married that same year.
Oh, so it was a short
Yeah.
courting.
So she taught in that high school. It's called Gillette Grove near Spencer. She taught there for 2 years.
Hmm.
And then we got married, and then...
What year were you married in?
1960.
1960.
In Ida Grove, Iowa.
Ida Grove.
And then we were in eastern Iowa, a town called Acme, Geneva, from 62 to 65. And then came back to South Dakota to Mount Marty College, which at that time was just a women's college.
And how did that... Was there an offer made to you to come back and be in the music program? Or?
Yeah. Well, the nuns contacted me.
Right.
So we came back to South Dakota.
What was the relationship with your family before you came back to Mount Marty? Was there a strong relationship with Mount Marty, with your parents, or was it not that close?
Yeah, there was, because Betty, or Susan, graduated from Mount Marty High School, and then, of course, ended up in the convent.
Right. She went to the convent there.
Yeah. So there was that relationship. And I think it was just the allure of teaching at college level.
And you spent your career at Mount Marty.
Yeah.
Were there ever any thoughts of going anywhere else, or was it something you were comfortable with as...
There were periods of times where, because of rather, I would say, chaotic administrative situations,
Mm-hmm.
where we might have moved. During that period, I also completed the Doctorate of Education at the university. It took me about 5 years, and I had to do 1 year on a sabbatical where I was released from teaching.
Hmm.
But it was a good decision to remain in Yankton, though, because of the education opportunities for our 4 sons. And 2 of them did graduate from Mount Marty.
Is that right? And which 2 were those?
Sean and David.
Sean and David. What, maybe you could compare and contrast a little what the school was like when you started in 1965, is that right? And 19...
Well,
2004.
when I first came here, there were very few lay people. In fact, we lay people felt like the enemy almost, because...
So what was the ratio, 10 to 1, or was it even more than
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that happened, I painted out the dripping Holy Ghost to my office.
You painted it out, my God.
And that was like a sacrilege, I mean.
Yeah.
But...
How many students were there at that time? And it was an all-girls school, yes?
I suppose 400, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I don't want to call it a women's finishing school, but it was something like that.
So...
But they ultimately became co-ed because they were told they were discriminating against men.
What year was that when it went co-ed?
69.
Oh, it was that early?
Yeah.
Huh.
And, well, especially in the nursing program, because at that point they weren't admitting any men.
Right.
So that was a big move. But the nuns were a little uncomfortable with guys coming in because they're messy for one thing, and the beer
Right.
bottles and stuff like that.
And they hadn't probably been around men in 50 years.
Well, they were told to have nothing to do with men. I mean, in those years,
Right.
if one nun went out, another had to go with them.
I see.
They couldn't even ride in the front seat of the car with their brother, or they had to be a nun.
Huh. So 69 it went co-ed, and did that attract many male students to the school?
Yeah, it took a while for it to happen. And then they had to institute some new programs. Then eventually an athletic program for men.
Mm-hmm.
So
And as life went on, the school what is the attendance at this point? How many students are there?
probably on this campus is 600 to 700, but they have a branch campus in Watertown and a master's program in Sioux Falls, so there's over 1,000. But a lot of those are part-time.
Right.
People.
Adult education and things like that.
Yeah.
Maybe we could go back a little bit and talk a little bit more about your family. You have 4 sons.
Yes.
Maybe you could give us a little thumbnail of when they were born, their names,
Okay.
and where they were born. I guess since Will was obviously somewhere else.
Will, who's the same age as you are, is 42. Is that what you are?
That is correct. Thank you.
Born in Spencer, Iowa. And he received all his education here.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately ended up at South Dakota State University majoring in business ag.
Mm-hmm.
And first worked for Citibank for many, many years in Sioux Falls and Kansas City. He has now returned to Sioux Falls with a home finance company. He is a trainer for that. Married a gal from Tripp, South Dakota. Very wonderful gal, and has 2 sons who are 9 and 7.
Excellent.
Very avid volunteer person. Was assistant fire chief for one of those areas up there.
Mm-hmm.
He's a pilot and an EMT. And then Sean was born in Iowa Falls, Iowa.
Hmm.
And
What year was that?
63.
63.
Yeah. And Sean graduated from Mount Marty with a degree in business and a minor in art, and has a construction company in Yankton. Been very successful with that. He and his girlfriend Joe live on a 10-acre plot out by the lake.
And Sean does some work with one of the other family members sometimes.
Yes,
too, right?
with
On the
Dennis
dock.
Louie.
Okay.
Yeah. And then David was born in 68 here in Yankton. Spent a year in Königstein, Germany as a exchange student.
Mm-hmm.
Came back to Mount Marty, graduated in 3 years because he wavered a whole year from having been in Germany. He's been in 35 theatrical productions.
Hmm.
Until recently worked for a children's theater in St. Paul. Just received his MBA from St. Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And is currently looking for another job.
It's good. Admirable profession.
And then Derek was born in 76 in Yankton. Graduated from Creighton University with a first degree in psychology and a recent degree, master's in electronic commerce. Works for a gift certificate in Omaha. An avid golfer.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, every day he's on the golf course.
That's.
So they've all been very diverse interests.
Yeah.
And
That's good. So are you officially now retired from Mount Marty?
well, I don't call it retired. I call it quit.
Okay.
I quit prematurely because of a terrible administrator, and I have recently been vindicated because he was fired, etc., etc.
Right.
But on principle quit, which is what we always taught our students to stand in principle. I've taught my kids, and but I'm very active right now. I have a part-time job at a music store. I'm chair of the South Dakota Humanities Council, which is quite busy, and
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the responsibilities with the council.
well, we fund many, many projects throughout the state. We are funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities through the Department of Interior. Have an executive director and 3 other people based in Brookings. And we just funded Chautauqua in the state of South Dakota. We had productions in Vermilion and in Gregory. Our next big project is this month in Sioux Falls, the book festival, for which we expect up to 30,000 people. And we fund projects in every town, big and small, throughout the state. And then I'm also the coordinator for a congressional conference in civic education. It's a 5-year term back and forth to Washington and Pierre, working with the state superintendent, state school board, to reform the teaching of civics in the schools, because teachers are not prepared for it, and the students have very little knowledge of government, and we're trying to increase that, plus their interest in volunteerism. And then I serve on the theater board here in Yankton, and just are currently directing the musical Oliver, plus numerous other things like Habitat for Humanity, and I can't remember all the stuff.
You have to keep a big calendar.
Yeah.
If you were to think about how your life impacted some of the decisions you've made with your parents, is there anything that, you mentioned you stand on principles as one of the things. I'm sure that was, I never knew your father, he died before I did, but
Yeah.
knowing your mother, my grandmother,
Yes.
obviously principles, maybe you could talk a little bit just about that in general, how that influenced your life and what you see.
Well, I think it all influences very much. I mean, she was one who, until 10 days before she died, was still speaking out on various issues. But she also had the tools to do that with her education and her degree in English. I mean, she was always writing and making chronicles of things, and that was a very, very good influence. Our father, perhaps to a certain degree, but yet he died when we were all pretty young.
How old were you when he died then?
26. And but I think our mother was the greater influence. I mean, to the very, very end.
Right.
And family was everything for her.
And she, when your father died, she moved off the farm into town to live with Ann.
Yeah.
And Ann was her older sister.
Right.
Do you know what the age difference was, and maybe you could talk a little bit about their relationship?
It was 6 years.
Ann was the older.
Yeah. And never married.
Never married.
Ultimately, they should never have lived together. Is this censored?
No, this is...
Two very independent women who would have worked very well living in a duplex, but with one kitchen and two women.
Yeah.
It worked, but it didn't work.
Right. There was a little tension every once in a while.
Yeah. But both very well educated women, and did very well with what they did.
Were there any relatives besides your mother and father that you felt were an influence on your life, whether they were your grandparents or aunts and uncles or whatever it might have been?
Well, several of the aunts and uncles, Aunt Mary Robinson, Uncle Bob, of course, who was probably the most favored of all the uncles. Of course, we weren't around some of these others that much, or around our Uncle Jim later in life when he came when Dad was sick.
And who was Uncle Jim?
He was the Army colonel, lived in Spokane. So I guess those were the primary people I can think of right now.
Right.
Well, on our mother's side, some of those uncles, like Uncle Jack, well, Uncle Francis, but he died pretty young too.
In thinking some more about that, do you recall the process when your father died? It sounds like it was a fairly short sickness. Is that right?
Yes. Well, maybe about a 1.5 or 2 year period there. And probably the thing that happened with that he really didn't prepare our mother for what was going to happen. I don't think he ever came to terms with the fact that he was that ill. And he didn't really give her any direction as to what to do. And I think that's why, after he died, she was in real quandary. She obviously could not stay here, did not want to stay here.
Right. And so she lived on the farm for a few months or so, and then she moved to town. Is that what the...
Around Christmas, and he died October 26th. She really didn't live here very long. But I think she was just frightened to stay here.
Yeah.
And I don't blame her.
Yeah. You mentioned Uncle Bob, and I had the opportunity to know him for part of my life and meet him a few times here as well as in Wagner. Is there an Uncle Bob story that sticks out in your mind, or?
Well, I don't know if it's the same particular one, but Bob really had a good time wherever he went, and again he was articulate and just gathered people around him, kind of like our Bob in our family.
Right. I think they're birds of a feather.
Yeah, and he had a series of tragedies too. His first wife died very young, at age 39, but he married a very nice lady and
who
went
was
on
it?
from there. And then he was in the state legislature.
Yeah. Did he have any children?
He had one son who died last year, Charles.
Charles. That's right. I know Charles. Is there any closing comment you'd like to leave your viewing audience?
Well, only that I think the reason that we all were successful was, again, the upbringing and the emphasis on work, which sometimes has been a curse.
Yeah,
of
it certainly has.
too much, adherence to the job.
Since no one else is listening right now, I'll ask you this question. But from looking at the family, everyone is so very different. There are similarities, but
Yeah.
I think each boy turned out vastly different in personality and in not so much in drive and goals, but in what they ended up professionally doing. Do you have a thought process on that?
Well, I don't know, other than I think that maybe that diversity was encouraged in growing up. I really do. I don't think anybody was put into a little box that you will do this, you will do this, that, other than the fact that they said you're going to have to have further education or do very well as Pat did with what he did.
Absolutely.
Because he had the managerial skills, and it isn't everybody could do what he did very successfully.
Yeah.
The fact that he had the interest in it too. Yeah. But I think it was just an attitude that permeated through again growing up. That you have these opportunities and take them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and it's going on to the next generation of which you're a part of.
That's right. Well, that's why we're doing this little project. We're hoping that we understand a little more clearly why we are what we are and who we are because of some of the interviews that we'll have with the people that were influential for us. And my closing comment is that clearly South Dakota was a small part of my life, but it was a very important part of my life, from my grandmother to my uncles and their families, and coming to South Dakota, which I still enjoy to this day.
Yeah.
So,
well, we appreciate you doing this, and again making those connections, because one of the last things my mother said before she died, if you want to know anything else, you better ask me right now, because when I'm gone, that's the end of the generation. Her generation, which is true,
Yeah, she was,
and everything is chronicled. I mean, until almost the very end, she was still typing her diaries.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we need to make sure that we all stay communicative on all these things.
Yes,
and if we have any follow-up questions, we'll know you. But Jack, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you.